Hey guys, this is Mrs. Yeagle, and today I'm reading you chapter 16 of Addison Cooke and the Tomb of the Khan. This chapter starts on page 165, and remember, today in class we talked about idioms. And so as we read together, I want you to be looking for those idioms that Jonathan Stokes, the author, uses, and how those different turns of phrase add to the excitement of the story. Chapter 16, The Russian Vor. Addison's team raced through the alleyways of Kashgar, checking over their shoulders for pursuing triads. They burst into the filthy saloon where they'd last seen Dax. Scanning the establishment, Addison saw two Tajiks dancing on the billiard table and a capuchin monkey swinging from the chandelier, but no sign of Dax. It was Molly who spotted Mr. Jacobson sharing a few links of Russian sausage with some Uzbek traders at the poker table. The Great Dane was lapping from a water bowl and appeared to be the toast of the bar. Addison was not entirely surprised to find Dax lying underneath the table. He slapped him a few times across the face. "Dax, the triads are after us. We gotta hop." "No, hello, how are you? How was your day?" Dax rubbed his jaw gingerly. His face was scratched and bruised. "What happened to you?" "I met one of your friends. They asked if I was your pilot." "You got beat up?" asked Molly, spotting a nasty welt over Dax's eye. "That's putting it a bit strong." "You look beat up." Addison and Molly helped Dax to his feet. Dax took a sip from the first glass he could reach at the bar. "He got in one lucky hit to my jaw," Dax said defensively. He took another sip of his drink. "Followed by 6 lucky hits to my head, 3 lucky hits to my stomach, and 7 or 8 lucky kicks after I hit the ground." Dax shrugged. "What can I say? He was a lucky guy." "How did the gambling go?" asked Eddie. "Not so hot," Dax grimaced. "My Chinese isn't the best. I asked the dealer to hit me, and he took it literally." "How many people hit you today?" asked Raj, his voice full of glowing admiration. "Including Addison just now?" "Never mind all that," said Addison, keeping things on track. He eyed the room for triads. "We need to get to your plane." "Yeah, about that," said Dax. "Your Russian friend took my keys sometime after he kicked my ribs in and before he poured his drink on me." "We have a Russian friend?" Molly asked. Addison frowned. "Dax, you're saying I've got a pilot with no plane? Think how I feel. Dax, armed men are hunting us." "That does not surprise me." "What's that supposed to mean?" Dax looked down at his bruised knuckles. "Kid, before I met you, I had 2 good fists, 1 good plane, and 0 black eyes." "I wouldn't say you had a good plane. It was okay at best. She was better than nothing, which is what I've got now." "Come on," said Addison, forcing Dax to down a fresh glass of water. "We're going to the airport. How hard can it be to find an airplane? It's not like they can just up and fly away." He patted sawdust from Dax's leather jacket and waved a warning finger before the pilot could respond. "Dax, losing an airplane is not acceptable. I want to let you know that I am seriously reconsidering our employment situation." "So am I, kid. So am I." Addison tore through the dusty, winding streets of Kashgar. Cutting through the market, he spotted triads combing the crowd. Mr. Jacobson, tongue flapping in the wind, had no trouble keeping up with Addison's team. Dax, on the other hand, kept pausing to clutch his ribs and wince. It was when Addison was sidestepping between vendor stalls that he caught a glimpse of the ancient Mongol. Addison's brain could not make any sense of it. Here he was, running through the present day, and there, across the alleyway, stood a vision of the 13th century. The Mongol wore plate mail, a full quiver of arrows, and a tangled beard. His hair was a long black ponytail on the top of his head. In his right hand, he gripped a spear. His coal-black eyes stared directly at Addison. Addison did not make a regular habit of being spied on by ancient Mongols, and he found this sight particularly arresting. He skidded to a halt and backed up a few steps to take a second look, but by the time he had disentangled himself from a sprinting Molly, the Mongol had vanished. Addison blinked and rubbed his eyes. He had no time for a psychological evaluation. Clearing his head with a few quick shakes, he powered back into a sprint. Triads shouted across the market square and began shoving their way through the crowds. Addison raced past carts selling nuts, roots, spices, and Persian carpets. Stalls selling sweets, knives, musical instruments, and Ugar hats. Street hawkers shilling Tajik garments, honeys, tamarinds, and kitchen utensils. Herders auctioning sheep, donkeys, goats, horses, camels, and yaks. What Addison really needed was a bicycle, but nobody had one of those. Addison spotted the potholed road leading to the airport. He took the turn at full tilt and found himself with a face full of Russian belly. He staggered back a few paces to see Boris, the crew-cut gangster from the Jade Tiger restaurant, folding his brawny arms across his broad wrestler's chest. Addison was getting altogether fed up with racing around corners and smacking into people, but his manners had not yet deserted him. "I beg your pardon." "Addison Cooke," spat the Russian. "You vile, pathetic son of a donkey." "Present," said Addison. "You are the impish kid who finished off Vladimir Rhaegar, trapping him in the Incan treasure chamber." "Vladimir Rhaegar? That vile, pathetic son of a donkey?" said Addison. "Why would anyone care what happens to him? I would expect you to thank me." "He was my brother." "Ah." Addison removed his ivy cap, rotating it a few times in his nervous hands. "Right then, my condolences." He had missed the basket, but still thought he could grab the rebound. He was not necessarily afraid of a tall, angry, muscle-bound man per se, but Boris was just a tall, angry, muscle-bound man in the same way the Sahara was just a rather large beach. "Listen, I think we may have gotten off to a bad start," he began. "You're going to get off to a worse end," said Boris. Apparently, Addison thought, cooler heads were not going to prevail. The rest of his team caught up behind him, assessed Boris's intimidating physique, and maintained a healthy distance. Addison thought that with Dax's help, they might be a match for Boris, but when he caught the wary looks in Dax's eye, he realized Dax had already fought Boris enough for one day. "How," said Addison, searching for a fertile topic of conversation, "did you find your way to Kashgar?" He steeled himself for a fight and was pleasantly surprised that Boris seemed to prefer to continue chatting. "My team tracked Madame Feng's flight to Kashgar. We decided to let her find the clue. We've surrounded the airport. She will have a hard time escaping." "Well," said Addison, finding himself on firmer ground, "we don't have the clue. What do you need us for?" He did not particularly feel like a stop and chat. He would really have preferred to keep running straight for the airport. The thing of it was, he couldn't help but notice Raj uncoiling a climbing rope from his backpack and clipping it firmly to a fence post with a carabiner. He figured it was best to keep Boris talking until he knew Raj's angle. "I am under special orders to capture you," said Boris, taking a step closer to Addison. "Orders from whom?" "Vrolak Malazar." Addison's blood froze at the sound of the name. "When you say Vrorlak Malazar, you don't by any chance mean the same Vrorlak Malazar who hired Professor Rhaegar to kidnap my aunt and uncle?" Boris nodded, feeling he was finally making some progress with Addison. "The same Vrorlak Malazar," Addison continued, "who has a strange vendetta against my entire family?" "The very same," said Boris. "I see." Addison did not think they could be talking about two different Vrorlak Malazars. He was now extremely invested in the conversation, but saw Raj clip a second carabiner onto Boris's rearmost belt loop. Boris was now, unknowingly, tethered to the fence post. Addison decided their conversation had run its natural course. Besides, a few triads were now scouting the opposite courtyard. He cocked 2 fingers to his cap in a polite salute. "Well, tell Vrorlak Malazar that Addison Cooke says hello." Addison turned and fled. He wasn't proud of this. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Boris raced after him. The big Russian made it 20 feet before the slack ran out of Raj's rope and snapped taut. Boris, unfortunately, had poured on a good head of steam. When the rope stopped short, Boris ran right out of his pants. There was a violent tearing of fabric. Boris, surprised to find himself suddenly in his underwear, took a few uncertain steps, unsure whether to maintain his pursuit. A crowd of women in headscarves carrying buckets from the well tittered and pointed at Boris. A goat herder joined the laughter. Boris decked the goat herder in the jaw and set to work trying to steal the man's pants. The goat herder's brothers joined the fray, fighting to keep the man's pants on their rightful owner. A fierce tug-of-war ensued. Addison knew this was the perfect moment to exit stage left, but he couldn't resist doubling back to where Boris's pants dangled on the end of Raj's rope. He relieved the pockets of their contents. Before Boris could spot him, he sprinted after his team, heading for the Kashgar airport.